Hello and welcome everyone to another week of CERIAS cybersecurity seminar. Today is my pleasure to introduce Alejandro Cuevas. Alejandro is a fifth-year PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University in uh, in societal computing. Advised by Professor Nicholas Christian. He is interested in measuring social influence in online community adjacent to underground economies. His recent work focuses on how reputation is leveraged in anonymous marketplaces, P2P marketplaces, and cryptocurrency communities. He is a recipient of CMU Scilab Presidential Fellowship, as well as an IEEE SMP Distinguished Paper Award. So today we're going to talk about the faults of stars, the fault in our stars, how reputation systems fail in practice. Alejandro, please take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about reputation systems. And before I start, just to illustrate what I'm going to be talking about today, I want you to imagine that you're going to plan your next vacation. And the question is whether you should go to Paraguay. And that's a country where I'm from. And so, you came to this talk, you saw this guy that seemed very pleasant and very excited to tell you about Paraguay. So you're considering to go there for vacation. And so you go to the US Department of State and you see that, it's a level 1, exercise normal precautions, that's good. There's some places that seem to be a level 2 where you need increased caution, but that's okay. You're a savvy traveler, so that doesn't steer you away too much. Then you look up news about Paraguay and you see sort of like a mix of things going on. There is a Forbes article saying that, Paraguay's Asunción is quietly enticing tourists. Hard yes for me from a blogger. There's some stuff about violent drug trade and, the truth about Paraguay and smugglers and so on. And so that's a little bit maybe slightly concerning, but, it's still hard to know. Some of those are old. The new stuff says it's a great country. So you go to Reddit. And Reddit says, well, Paraguay is one of the better countries, but 2 people seem to disagree with that, especially one of them has 9 upvotes. So far you're a little bit confused, but it's a broad country. There must be a lot to offer in this place. So let's say you're considering now Ciudad del Este. Ciudad del Este is my hometown. And so you go to Expedia and you find this place and you're looking for places to stay. And the first place that comes up is this Hospedaje Rey León, $20. 2 out of 10 rating though, which is not great. Only 1 review. So maybe, how bad can it be if it's sold out? You go on Google reviews, 4.5 stars, 35 Google reviews. Seems a lot better. Seems like this is a place where you'll stay after all. Facebook looks good, 4.5K likes, 4.6K followers, good social proof. You look up something else on Google, this hotels.com says 72K reviews, 4.3 average stars. Unfortunately, that's a Google SEO bug that if you didn't click on the link, you wouldn't realize that it's actually just 2 out of 10 rating, also with 1 review, but maybe this misled you. And then lastly, you also find the place on Airbnb and the host has a verified identity, verified email address, verified phone number, and a 5 out of 5 rating from 1 review. So do you stay here? And based on these reviews, some of you may say no, some of you may say yes. I, who live there, I would not wish any of you to stay in this place. And I don't know how this place got 4.5 rating, honestly. So I would say, yes, please visit Paraguay, but please don't stay in this place. But let's say you're still going on your trip and now you need headphones to take on your trip, right? And so you go on Amazon, you search for headphones, you get some Bluetooth ones coming up and you sort it by the top 3 by average customer review. I don't know anybody who would ever buy a product of Amazon just directly from what they saw on Amazon. So, if you're like any other normal being, you would probably go somewhere else to get a review. And one of the places that is decently accurate potentially for electronic reviews would be New York Times Wirecutter, right? They are kind of an independent reviewer, at least that's what they claim. That all their editors try, do some rigorous testing and so on for the products that they recommend, and they, on their side, they pick this Soundcore Space One, which I immediately already disagree with their decision, because apparently you have to adjust the sound through a Soundcore app, and that just, I don't know how this got the best pick. And you may see that there's a disgruntled user already in the comments section saying that some other headphone that was recommended in this list, the Sonoflow, are garbage. Okay, so even getting a headphone recommendation seems a little bit hard. So then you go again on Reddit, and Reddit, instead of just telling you, which headphone to buy, it gives you a list of 41 forums that you can check out to go find reviews and about the best headphones. And so now you need some recommendation on what the best forum here to get the reviews for the headphones that you want to buy is. And so you go on again on another Reddit discussion thread that has a ranking for what the best forum to go find the reviews for the best headphone is. And so what I hope I illustrated with that is that it's really hard, and it's becoming harder to extract accurate reputation signals, right? You have a marketplace that has an internal reputation system that I personally, at least anecdotally, don't think know a lot of people that fully rely on Amazon's reputation system to guide their choice. And you have a lot of other places that inform the reputation that you derive for different things online, right? It could be the US Department of State if you're thinking about a country. It could be Expedia, Google Reviews, TripAdvisor, whatever it is for flights and hotels and accommodations. And it could be a variety of other things if you're thinking about products and so on. And it gets a little bit murkier even when you consider that a lot of these outlets also take paid promotion, right? So you could see what seems like an honest review in social media only to find out later that it was just bought as an ad space by somebody else, right? And so the truth is that creating trustworthy signals is a big business, right? There's a whole ecosystem of companies that basically sell you reviews of things, right? The Better Business Bureau alone that you see on the top left, which does some sort of accreditation for businesses and gives you a sort of a confidence rating for businesses, is worth $5 billion. And we have other type of entities that review different types of things. You have Glassdoor for jobs and companies, IMDb for movies, Trustpilot for other companies, Yelp for food, the Michelin Guide for restaurant, and Labdoor for supplements, and Consumer Reports for products. You have a whole ecosystem of companies that are purely dedicated to creating trustworthy signals, because right now deriving reputation or trustworthy signals is hard and time consuming. And to understand why this is the case and why this concerns us as security researchers, we have to really understand why reputation signals or reputation systems were created to begin with. So before online trade became what it is today, right now, online trade is taken for granted, right? The fact that Amazon and eBay and all these things work, we couldn't imagine anything otherwise, right? But in the 80s and 90s, you would actually find a lot of skeptical economists about the idea of online trade working. And the reason was very simple. There was this economist named George Akerlof who later won a Nobel Prize for his work on something called the market for lemons. And the market for lemons basically stated that asymmetric information between two parties could so hinder a market that it could push it to failure, right? So it was incomprehensible that you had these two people that could be so remotely distant and not know anything about each other, and the buyer didn't know anything except what the seller told him about the good, and they had nothing to anchor their trust on, right? And in the market for lemons, there's this idea of adverse selection, and the idea that there's uncertainty in this market that comes from the seller potentially not disclosing information about the good, right? Like, I'm going to sell you headphones. You are in West Lafayette. I'm in Pittsburgh. I advertise you my headphones, new, little use, phenomenal sound, et cetera, et cetera. And then I send that to you and it's broken. It arrives with a problem. You have to adjust the volume with an app and so on and so forth. And you'll be disgruntled by that. And then there's this issue of moral hazard as well, right? That I, as a seller, can incur risks that affect you, and I don't have an incentive to not take those risks. So for instance, I could skimp on the packaging for the headphones and save some money that way. And if the headphones arrive damaged, well, it's your fault. Like, I already got the money, you already paid for the product. So there's no incentive for me to really, do a great job, right? And this can be formalized a little bit better in this very simple experiment, right? That if you think about a sort of like an opportunistic seller and an honest seller, and you have sort of this buyer that wants to buy something from the seller, if the game is only played once, the opportunistic seller should, at least, morals aside, always abuse the trust and always choose to sort of take your money, not give you anything, and sort of keep the good and also keep the money, right? And you're left without anything, and I have my good, I still have my headphones, and I have your money. But if the game is played more than once, then future rewards can really discipline an opportunistic seller. And so future rewards are introduced by this idea of reputation. And the moment you introduce reputation and the expectation of future reward, then you have sort of the semblance of a functioning online market, right? All of a sudden, by behaving honestly in the present, I have an incentive to sort of keep behaving honestly in the future, because more and more people will want to buy from me. And this is an idea that not only works on online marketplaces, right? Reputation systems also enable functioning online communities and foster quality. So there's a whole set of research that comes from the HCI world, where you can stir behavior with badges, and you can sort of create these intangible things like Stack Exchange reputation that incentivizes people to sort of behave honestly. And it works even also in GitHub, right? GitHub repo maintainers may put some signals and badges on the repo to attract developers and attract quality contributions. And reputation systems could also be our last line of defense if we are forced into a crowdsourced moderation model. And why do I say that? Well, in the Supreme Court, I think last week, we were hearing arguments about complaints that social media platforms were disproportionately censoring conservative views, right? And so something that was central to this case was the idea of whether content moderation should be done by these platforms. And so if all of a sudden Facebook shouldn't do content moderation anymore, then content moderation will have to be done by the users potentially of the platform, right? Like either self-appointed moderators or community-appointed moderators, or other users in the platform that rely on these reputation systems to sort of reward and punish users. So essentially, we have this sort of social technical system where we have algorithms and humans that are all playing together to improve platform health. And when I say improving platform health, I really mean rewarding high quality behavior or high quality contribution. That could be, being an honest seller, or, an honest content creator and not spreading misinformation and so on. Or it could also be, not botting or not committing fraud, or, not violating terms of service. And so you have, for instance, recommendation algorithms that will prioritize or deprioritize certain users based on reputation. You have crowds that should technically or theoretically choose users based on this trust or distrust that is conveyed through the reputation signals. And you have also moderation that is done by humans or algorithms and humans, or sometimes even just algorithms, that may either scrutinize certain users more based on their reputation, or sometimes even just ban them directly, right? If you maybe just joined the platform and all of a sudden 10 people report you for bad behavior, then the engine might just choose to immediately suspend you because you might be flagged as a potential account that it will engage in abuse. And so in this talk, what I want to really talk about is whether some of these components are working as intended. And it's been kind of hard to study some of these components because they're so interconnected that a lot of times it's hard to disentangle some of the variables from each other, because the effect of a recommender system, you may want to isolate that from the effect of reputation signals on the crowds. And unless you're working at eBay, you may not have that amount of control over the data to carry out those experiments. But I'll tell you a little bit about what type of markets are ideal for these type of experiments. So I'll talk about what signals lead to the expected outcomes when we think about platform health. I will then talk about how moderation is affected by reputation signals, and foreshadowing a little bit how it's adversely affected actually, and not necessarily positively affected as you might expect. And then I'll give a little bit of a hint about what should we be thinking about to create new useful signals, especially beyond marketplaces. So far I've talked a little bit about social media and mentioned how social media also benefits from reputation. But a lot of the work that has been done so far, and that even will be presented here, starts from a marketplace centric where there's goods and services, and there's a reason for that. But we'll touch a little bit that later in the talk. So these will be the 3 steps. You will know that we are 75% or almost 80% through this presentation once we're reaching the moderation part. And some of this work I led, and there's some of this work also that has been led by a colleague of mine that you get to see by the end also of this presentation. Cool. So online anonymous markets, OAMs, are a great place to study reputation. So you might think, okay, what the heck are OAMs? So OAMs were typically previously known as dark web marketplaces. And these marketplaces basically deal with illicit goods, mostly drugs, but also things like malware and malware-related things, hacking, logins, also counterfeit goods and so on, but mostly you can think of them as drugs and malware-related things. And OAMs are pretty great because you have very little exogenous factors that could impact your experiments. So these marketplaces are usually, maintained by a very small group of individuals. They're not super sophisticated, so you don't have any sophisticated recommendation algorithms at play. The vendors in these marketplaces are also not necessarily Twitter famous or advertising the products to a huge audience of people that could impact their sales. Really what you see in the platform is what you get. So for instance, for a vendor here, you see their rating, you see the reviews, you see their sales. And if you're a buyer, this is all that you have to guide your decision-making of whether you will trust this vendor or not. Another thing that is really good about OAMs, especially externally, is that we have some validated proxies to estimate the sales. So again, if you wanted to study, sales on Amazon, for instance, it will be really hard unless you worked at Amazon to know how much a vendor is actually making. But in OAMs, we have some work, and we have some especially validated proxies to estimate sales that we did in a Usenix paper in 2022. And lastly, trust and reputation are really, really important in these marketplaces, you may imagine, because we're dealing with illicit goods and sometimes goods that could really, damage or hurt people, right? Especially when we're thinking about very dangerous drugs. And so the way that we estimate sales in these reputation systems are basically by taking reviews under a listing and using that as a lower bound, right? So if you have that silent crypto miner that is worth $6 and you have 2 reviews under it, we assume that, you know, there's 2 sales at least, and that listing has generated $12. Now you may say, well, hold a second, why, obviously there could be a lot more transactions and reviews. Isn't that the case on Amazon? Yes, that is the case, but a lot of these marketplaces actually really, really need the reputation buildup. So they either heavily incentivize you leaving reviews, or they leave reviews automatically if you buy something. So it turns out that reviews often track sales pretty well in certain marketplaces. And in some other marketplaces where they don't, we have some extra techniques to correct for these measurement biases. And that's what this Usenix 22 paper was all about. So for now, and for the rest of the presentation, just assume that, when we estimate sales, we are pretty good at doing it. Okay, so we conducted this study where we were trying to understand, what was the impact of reputation on sales, right? Earlier I told you, well, if you have high reputation in the future, you would probably want to keep having higher reputation so that you attract more sales. And so we wanted to put that to the test, and we wanted to say, okay, does reputation predict sales in the future? And so we looked at 8 individual markets over 12 years. And for some of these markets, most of the time, as I told you, what you see is what you get. So there's no other avenue of reputation that influences the market, except that sometimes there are. And for one of these markets, for instance, they had an internal forum, so we took that into account. And for another of these markets, there were 2 subreddits. And at the time, there were many other subreddits also where other vendors were discussed. But we chose specifically these 2 for a market that we have very good confidence about what their sales look like. And because I had to manually go and look at these 2,294 posts and 13,000 comments, and label whether they were, comments that meant good or bad reputation, I also just did it for one market because it would have been pretty tough to do it for the 8 of them. I think it took me several weeks just to get, or at least 2 weeks just to get through reading all these comments and posts. And so after I extracted all these signals manually, and we extracted all these quantitative metrics for all these markets, we put all these in a nice, easy set of decision tree-based models, and we tried to estimate whether at the end of the market, we could tell whether you were in the top 25% vendors or in any other quartile. So quartiles are basically you split the sales of all the vendors in buckets of 25%, and they are sort of ordered from top to bottom, right? And so what I could tell you is that reputation systems and reputation signals were not necessarily the best predictor of seller success. So the good news is that, remarkably, we could predict pretty well what your standing would be at the end of the market. So by half of the market, we could tell with about 75% accuracy where you would stand at the end. So if the market lasted like 4 years, by year 2, we could sort of tease out how much revenue, at least relative to each other, you would have by the end of the market, which was pretty remarkable. And what we found with this is that, again, reputation signals alone were not really the main predictor. And instead, we had some other combination of signals that were more predictive of that. And most of our decrease in accuracy actually came from trying to estimate that middle part of the curve that you see. So estimating the top 25% of vendors and estimating the bottom 25% of vendors, we're actually doing pretty good. We had about, F1 score of 0.85 and 0.88 for each of these, which is sort of, I believe, is the harmonic mean of precision and recall. So we're doing pretty good with those. But the middle 50% of vendors was kind of tough, and that makes sense because the difference between a vendor who made, maybe $10,000 in sales or $20,000 in sales is not that much to tease out just from signals alone, and may even be just a result of some measurement errors, right? So this is all good news so far, and I have to tell you about which signals really mattered. But another thing that I can tell you was that for Hansa, which we looked at the subreddits, those manually coded reputation signals, and Nemesis, which we had that internal forum, we actually didn't have any sort of significant increase in accuracy by including those. The prediction worked pretty similarly, actually. So adding those external reputation signals, again, didn't really seem to matter whether somebody on Reddit was saying that you were a scammer or that you had a good product. After all, it seemed like the signals in the market itself were the ones that mattered the most. And we have a pretty good hypothesis of why this is the case. And it has to potentially do with something, again, from economics called signaling theory. And signaling theory, quick and dirty, would be the fact that the signals that matter the most to determine quality may actually be the ones that are just the hardest to forge, right? So an economist might say, hey, the reason that a diploma from some great school, let's say CMU, since I'm representing, it's a great signal for an employer because it took a lot of time and effort to get. So, if I went there and did 6 years of computer science PhD, then the vendor will say, or the employer will say, well, they had to go through the admissions process, then they had to spend 6 years, and then they had to clear, blah, blah, blah. This diploma encapsulates all of that and is signaling to me that this is a high quality employee. So this kind of makes common sense, because if I were to tell you, hey, look at these two vendors on the right, you see that one of them has rating 5 out of 5 and 133 reviews, 209 sales, and the other has 4.6 out of 5, 1,300 reviews, and 5,900 sales. And I told you, hey, who would you trust more to buy, this very dangerous good? I think, well, at least to, the people that I asked, they would say, well, the one that has the more sales, because, maybe they proved themselves more, right? Doesn't matter that they got 4.6, you get some 1 stars here and there. And so that's kind of what we see when we did this evaluation study of our classifier. So when we removed just the revenue related features, we had the biggest mean decrease. But interestingly, when you remove reputation alone, you had very little decrease. But when you decreased or removed revenue and reputation together, you actually had the highest decrease. And so that's pretty interesting, because maybe in that sense, if this vendor had 5,900 sales and 5 out of 5 rating, that indeed would be the hardest to forge. And indeed, that gives you a pretty strong signal. 5 out of 5 alone, maybe not as much. 5,900 alone, yes, a lot. 5,900 sales plus 5 out of 5 rating, a decently good signal. Another hypothesis that we have is that, and before I go there, this also explains potentially the stuff about forums, right? So in forums, going on Reddit and saying, hey, I'm a great vendor and this other vendor is a scammer, is actually a very cheap signal to reproduce. It's very easy to do. And from the manual analysis that I did, I could tell you that a lot of people didn't really seem to care so much about that. Again, because it was very easy to forge, is what signaling theory would say. Another thing could be based on operational capacity. And the reason perhaps that we were able to estimate, well, who would perform really well and who would perform not quite well, could do with the operational capacity, right? So scaling businesses is pretty tough. And especially if you have two vendors that are selling drugs on the underground markets, one of them, may have the capacity to handle hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales, but another one may not, right? And so pretty quickly, you could see just by the volume of sales that they have, that maybe they are just not able to scale that much to what they could if they had the operations to do that. And so that could be a reason also why sales is potentially a good predictor, at least more so than reputation. Okay, so one of the goals of reputation signals that I told you earlier was, rewarding good vendors and whether this related with more revenue in the future. So what about pushing vendors off the platform? Does reputation help take people off the platform? And is it enough of a deterrent to sort of, get bad quality vendors to leave? And what we did here was we considered the last review as sort of like a proxy for the last sale, and as thus the vendor's disappearance, right? The idea being that, if we were all together in a marketplace and we were all selling things, the moment you stopped having sales, we consider as if you, just either took your shop down and walked away, or people stopped trusting you. And we tried to build a classifier to estimate whether you would disappear in the next 1 to 3 months in the same procedure that we did with the revenue, right? And it was actually kind of hard. So we had a F1 performance of less than 25%, which was pretty underwhelming. But we thought that these classifiers probably still had some signal. And we thought that reputation, at least in some way, seemed to have some predictive or at least explanatory power. And so what we did instead is we borrowed from these family of models that are typically used in clinical settings. And there's these things called hazards models that are used to estimate, for instance, whether a drug increases your survivability to some sort of condition. So what usually they would do in clinical settings is they'll split, a control and a treatment group. They'll administer a drug to one of the groups, and then they will run this very fancy model to see if that drug had any significant effect on your survivability. So that's, in that case, the death event is death itself. In this case, the death event is the disappearance from the market. And you have this very nice exponential sort of function here that captures these dynamics. And in this case, we chose to model the average feedback score, whether you were present or not in other markets, because that sort of gave an idea or signal of the scale of your operations, and also the type of good that you were selling, whether you primarily dealt soft drugs, hard drugs, or digital goods. And so we did find that reputation signals could explain seller disappearance retroactively. So if you look at all these 8 markets that we look at, all except for one, we could see that the reputation and the presence in other markets actually, mattered in explaining the disappearance. So in all of these, when you look at the hazards rate, your probability of surviving goes up the higher your feedback value is, and it goes up if you're present in other markets. Nemesis, the presence in other markets, didn't end up mattering. And the reason is probably because Nemesis is a market from 2021 to 2023, and Hansa was all the other markets were kind of like contemporary to each other. So a lot of the Nemesis vendors were actually pretty new and had not been around for other markets. So it makes sense that the presence in other markets didn't really impact it as much. But remarkably, the average feedback value did seem to matter. And for Silk Road 1, there's no presence in other markets because it's the first market. But yes, the signal from the average feedback value did seem to have some good explanatory power in saying, okay, yes, it is actually taking the vendors off the platform, at least when you look at the whole market. Predictively, we're not quite there yet. So then we tried something else, and we said, okay, what happens if we look at what our classifier said, right? Like I told you earlier that I had this classifier, and if I asked my classifier to give me the top N users that it thought were high risk, and in this case, high risk were what my classifier thought were going to leave in the next month. Medium risk were vendors that it thought it was going to leave in the next 3 months. And then we had sort of like the lowest reputation rating users, right? And what if we created these 4 categories, one of them being a random selection, and we measured their survival time? So maybe you would be high risk, and it didn't matter so much whether you disappeared immediately in 1 month, because our accuracy was bad. But maybe we are picking up on something that potentially is telling us that you're not quite so great of a vendor, at least in the sense that your public signals seem to be predicting that you are going to leave the market. And so we did this experiment, like then across all these markets again. And the good thing is that if you look at the high predicted risk for all of them, indeed is the lowest one, which means that it was picking up on the users that had the shortest survival time. And the median predicted risk similarly was just slightly higher, but in most cases below the lowest average feedback score and above the high predicted risk. And we see that the lowest average feedback score alone as a condition wasn't the greatest at explaining, or at picking up users who were going to leave. So you could have bad average feedback score, but you could still have a pretty long survival time, which was pretty remarkable. Again, this seems to indicate that reputation signal on its own is kind of weak. Combined with other things, it's a little bit better. And even better is to take into account a whole set of signals. But you may say, okay, you only looked at 8 markets over 12 years, with longitudinal data, but maybe this wouldn't really hold anywhere else. So I say, okay, yeah, let's find out. So we looked at another market, and in this case it's Paxful, which is a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency marketplace. And in this marketplace, people basically transact peer-to-peer cryptocurrencies. You may buy Bitcoin and you want to give me a card, a prepaid debit card as payment. And what is really nice about this platform is that they give a whole host of reputation signals and verification signals. And most importantly, they tell us when they suspend a user, right? And that label is really important because in the previous experiments, we were looking at vendor disappearance, kind of just estimating by the last day of review. But in this case, we can really look at suspension, for instance, and we can sort of see if our public signals are picking up on users who are misbehaving. And so we ran the exact same experiment in this case, and we did it online. Online means that, we chose all the users that we thought looked risky. We picked, 500 users at random, and we picked the lowest reputable 500 users. And we picked all of them on February 28th last year. And we said, okay, let's look at what happens 1 month from now. How many of these accounts disappear? And lo and behold, our predictor did pretty good, actually, or significantly better, at least at just random and reputation, at picking up accounts that were indeed going to get suspended. And so when we looked at what mattered here, remarkably, negative feedback, for instance, wasn't a signal that really mattered, but other things like who was blocking you or who you're blocking or how long ago you were in the platform or how many trades you had or trade partners had a bigger impact. Interestingly, the number of positive reviews over total number of trades was a signal that was picked up, even though it wasn't on the profile. And then this ego density and total degree, which I'm not going to get into in too much depth, but basically your network connections had an impact on whether you were picked up by the classifier as potentially being risky or not. And so to recap, we have reputation signals that are closely correlated with vendor success and disappearance. Reputation, again, alone doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot of work. So the solution is to probably just to create more meaningful and harder to forge signals. And not a new idea is to create signals that require time or monetary commitment, right? This is something that has been proposed in previous literature already. And it seems like it makes sense. That would be hard to forge if you had, a botting problem. If you ask the bots now, each account costs $1 to create, maybe you'll have less bots. And so I know we're almost at 40 minutes. And so I'm going to just quickly tell you about this other platform that tells us that these type of signals are not necessarily the silver bullet solution. So we looked at a platform called TradingView, and TradingView is a platform where people share ideas about financial markets, and you have reputation, and you also have sort of membership tiers that you can pay for. And the dynamics of TradingView don't matter in as much as the fact that we were also able to collect, comments that were removed by moderators and articles that were removed by moderators, and also suspension. And then we also, manually looked at a subset of these comments to get an idea of what they were removed for, and it's because they were either toxic, spam, or they were just plainly weird. And unfortunately, we don't have as much time to talk about why they were weird. But what I can tell you is that basically, for the same number of violations, so if you see the blue line on the right, is the ratio of accounts that were basically suspended by that number of violations. So the x-axis, it means more number of violations, and at each of them, you can just think of basically how many accounts or percentage of accounts that are being removed by the number of violations. So the more number of removed comments you had, usually should indicate that you're getting suspended more. And what we see is that regular users were suspended the most, reputable users, which is green, less so, and paying users less so. And we observed sort of the same effect with moderated articles, and we observed the same effect with sort of fake accounts and how we found fake accounts and so on. I'll just leave for now that you can find the details in the paper. And then we looked at this with a logistic regression. And I'll spend a little bit more time here to just tell you that basically the number of removed comments or moderated articles or fake accounts that you had indeed were bigger predictors of you being suspended, which is intuitive. However, if you were a pro account and committed these infractions, it didn't really matter too much. So basically, if you look at the coefficient for moderated articles and fake accounts is negative. So it means that you still had actually a less chance of being suspended if you were a paying user, for instance, and you were having some sort of misbehavior. And the most salient graph of all of this was basically, if you look at the bottom right, even though regular users were banned, around like 60% a day for having fake accounts that followed them in the same day, the green and the red lines were actually significantly lower. And this seems to indicate that the moderators that work at TradingView or that look at these sort of cases are looking at these accounts and saying, well, look, maybe this account is posting questionable articles or posting questionable comments or having a lot of fake accounts, but how bad can they be? Or is this really bad? Maybe we're just misjudging them, because they're paying for the platform, so maybe we shouldn't suspend them. Or they're contributing a lot to the platform, they seem reputable, let's not suspend them. So it seems that in that way, the paying status and reputation is actually affecting adversely the content moderation efforts. And so if you use Twitter, this shouldn't really surprise you, because Twitter, after changing their verification system, and now that you can pay for verification, I feel like more often than not, I see sort of accounts that are posting phishing or spam type of links that have a verified checkmark, actually. And they seem to be getting away more with this type of platform abuse by having sort of this paying subscription in the platform. And this is something that we're studying right now. Additionally, there's a large ecosystem enabling the commoditization of reputation. So stuff about accounts that you can buy, and you can use them to sort of enable these new type of attack vectors. Unfortunately, we won't have time to touch upon today, but it seems like the current literature, at least, that of abusing of attacking reputation systems is not really considering potentially the fact that reputation can indeed be used to bypass the scrutiny that you would otherwise have for moderation, or that you can all of a sudden have people that are selling accounts to each other, and one person cultivates a very large following, and then another person comes in and monetizes it through a phishing attack to its followers and so on. So just to wrap up, I'm going to say that there's different fields that are tackling different aspects of this problem. There's computer security people, there's economists, there's HCI people. And what we really need is sort of like a mix, an interdisciplinary approach to improve the social technical system that I described at the beginning, that is grounded in econ theory, that has usability in mind, and that it has sort of robust attack modeling that we're so good at in the computer security world. And all of this really needs to be empirically evaluated so that we have confidence in that the theory really matches practice. So sorry to speed up a little bit through the end. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope this stimulated some new thoughts for you. I wanted to thank, again, more profusely, Nicholas, who is my advisor, and Taro, who led some of the work on TradingView and cryptocurrency peer-to-peer marketplaces. A lot of this work wouldn't have been possible without their help. And yeah, thanks again for having me in this seminar. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much for the talk. The audience, please put your questions in the question and answer panel. Okay. We have a comment, not a question.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question. Have you ever been scammed by one of the things you mentioned? Have I ever bought a product that I feel it was misrepresented online? Yes. Have I ever booked a place, Airbnb, hotel that I thought was also very misrepresented? Yes. And I feel like I also have bought things from eBay or Amazon and they haven't shown up. So I would say maybe yes in those contexts. We also have some work showing that in terms of not as directly a scam, but financial influencers or influencers who talk about, they give advice about cryptocurrency markets, for instance, tend to misrepresent their advice. So it's not necessarily a scam, but for some people, I wouldn't blame them if they feel scammed by the fact that they read something that seemed very insightful tip or piece of advice from markets, and then they end up losing a lot of money based on that advice. I would kind of consider that to be a scam as well.
So I have a question about the signals that you mentioned. So it seems that one of the reasons that the potential bad actors try to optimize for these signals is that because they're effective now, right? So if we move to a new system where we highlight those things that we think that are more those signals, or like highlight those signals that we think more accurate, then doesn't that lead to bad actors to optimize for those new signals?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. Something that I didn't get the chance to get into this talk, unfortunately, I think it's called Goodhart's Law. It's basically something that when something is the target, it stops being a good target, or when something is a metric, it stops being a good metric because it will just sort of get gamed in that way. And I've been posed this question a few times. I want to say that there might be two ways to answer it. So how I want to tackle it is I want to look at this ecosystem of commoditized reputation that has been ongoing for about 10 years. And I want to look at what signals in the underground market have become costlier to replicate. So for instance, right now, the cost of a verified TikTok account, let's say it's $10. Or actually, let me use Twitter. Let me use Instagram because they all have sort of different paradigms. So let's say an Instagram account now that is verified costs $10 with phone verification and US IP address and stuff like that. If that account costed $1 in the past, I would be tempted to say that things have been sort of improving and sort of that whatever Meta has been doing to increase the difficulty of acquiring these signals is actually working, because in the secondary market, they're becoming costlier to replicate. But if they aren't, and that we just see like sort of a monotonic decrease of all these signals, then I would be somewhat tempted to agree with you and say, hey, yeah, maybe everything that we have tried so far in terms of verification and sort of these signals that we're showing are not really working, and we really need to revamp them. I think that would be sort of the empiricist approach. But I want to say that with some of the new sort of cryptographic tools that we have, for instance, I didn't get the chance to talk about cryptographic attestations, but I'm tempted to believe that with strong cryptography, so using cryptography to create certain types of signals that attest certain types of things about yourself, we may be able to derive some signals that are indeed meaningful and that are indeed hard to replicate. And I want to be hopeful that that could be the case. For some things, the cost of forgery can be increased quite easily, requiring payment processing intermediary commission, something that can't be refunding without invalidating the review. How high do costs need to be to make this work? Yeah, so I think traditionally in computer security, a lot of time, for a long time, we just thought of fixing civils, for instance, as just having some sort of marginal cost to creating civils and saying, okay, now that it costs 50 cents or $1, you can now have 1 million of these accounts. And I think that was something that was thought also in the context of email, right? Email is so cheap, but maybe if email was just a little bit costlier, maybe we wouldn't have so much spam. And I think when we think of sort of like these marginal increases to civil protection, it may still be palatable. But what I'm thinking about as a new attack vector is that there's sort of these very big accounts that all of a sudden an attacker who says, hey, I'm going to spend $5,000 to buy this Twitter account that has 1 million followers, and I'm going to run this phishing link on all the followers because I expect to make more money out of that. All of a sudden, well, we cannot say, hey, it should cost $5,000 to have Twitter accounts, or we cannot say, well, it should cost a certain amount of money to have more than X amount of followers and so on. And so that's why I said, like, I think econ theory would tell you that if we just keep increasing, there might be some optimal place to reach. But I'm not convinced that it should purely be just an economic approach and sort of like an economic disincentivization, in as much as it could be, yes, making costs high to a certain degree, but having other type of incentives on one side, or at least other type of things that come into play that are not just econ. That's my quick and dirty response to that. So hopefully it answers it to certain satisfiability. Did you come across some novel hard to forge signals recently? So I was at Microsoft Research last summer, and they were doing a lot of work on trying to create online governance communities and sort of enabling more secure voting and
the way that they were thinking about it was through these cryptographic attestations that I mentioned earlier. And the idea is that what happens if you could go to the DMV and get something through some nice in-person protocol mixed with some nice cryptography, that all of a sudden your email gets a badge that you are DMV verified, just loosely. And they said, well, what if you could have attestations of things like that? For instance, that you had a US driver's license, or that you were registered in Pittsburgh to vote, or that you owned a library card, or things like that. And what if you could transform sort of these facts of regular day life into things that you could display online that could be verified? And the question for them is exactly what signals to have. They think they have a way of creating hard to forge signals, but right now the problem is, what should these signals be? And I don't have a question to what these signals should be, in as much as there might be at least the mechanism to create something that is harder to forge. But yes, I'm in the quest to figure out what those signals should indeed be.
Thank you.
I will say that for the longest time, I think the time of your account used to be a strong signal. So if you have a Twitter account that was registered in 2009, that would be a strong signal of how trustworthy you were. But it seems that when you look at secondary market prices, that they're still that it doesn't cost that much to buy an old account. So it is to a certain degree, but it's not super hard to forge. It seems, if there's a market that enables easy forgery by means of purchasing.
So in the case of, for example, Amazon or something like that, it is also not that hard to do some kind of like bribing users to write good reviews, even if you do have attestation or like verified user, you can still create bad signals.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and even expand on that. There's these communities of people, for instance, that would have a group chat, and they all own Instagram accounts, let's say, and they're all real people that get on this group chat and talk about how they are going to just engage with each other's content, right? And in this case, you are having, you have some sort of platform abuse in this case. It's not really done what you would consider traditional malicious actors. There's people that are taking advantage of the system, and there's all real people. They're not civils. They're just trading reputation with each other and engaging with each other's content and sort of like growing their accounts like that. And I can't avoid but think that, as you mentioned earlier, that if engagement, if that is a prominent practice, that the market or the users will stop looking at sort of engagement and following of followers as things to trust, because they are saying, well, look, these things are so easy to cultivate. Or in the case of Amazon, right? I think something that happens already that people are kind of loosely aware is that you can go and see an item on Amazon that has 20,000 reviews. And that if you scroll past page 10, you realize that, 90% of the reviews were for a different product, and that they were, selling a $1 product and cultivated 20,000 reviews, and now they're selling you a $50 product, and looks like a lot of people bought it. And I think it might not be white knowledge, but I think something that at least these experiments seem to show is that users still seem to develop sort of an intuition of the fact that, okay, yeah, 20,000 reviews, yeah, right, I'm gonna go and look somewhere else to see if I should actually buy this product. So I still think that there is an opportunity for things that are just not as easily gameable. And I can't begin yet to envision what those are, but at least we seem to have hints that users pick up on what things are easily gameable and what they are not, at least from a crowd perspective. Now it's a matter of figuring out, okay, from those things that are getting picked up right now, what are gameable, what are not, and if they are all gameable, okay, what can we do moving forward?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Professor Clifton, for the invitation and the nice question.
Right, it seems there's no other question. Thanks for the great talk and the great question and answer session.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Alejandro. Take care.
Take care. Have a good one.